Susan Sontag, would you consider yourself a struggler?
Yes. I don't like to use such a word, but if you use it, I can't. Well, I don't know. No, that's a really interesting question. I won't answer it right off. Am I a struggler? I think that life is complicated. I think that difficult things attract me. They seem more worth doing. I suppose I have that kind of temperament where I say, if it's very easy, then it can't be that worth doing. Things which are difficult attract me. So I would rather than say I'm a struggler, I would say I am attracted to things which are challenging or difficult. And then, of course, they are really challenging or difficult, and so it does take a lot of effort or struggle. Because if you say someone is a struggler, it makes them sound very stern. You know, as if they're just working all the time. I'm, in my own way, quite a hedonist. There are many things that give me pleasure, and I pursue these pleasures.
What was your immediate reaction to the tragic events of September 11th?
Well, unfortunately, I was not in New York on September 11th. I wish, since I live in New York and I like very much this city, I consider this city a home. If I have any home, it is in this city. This is where I live most of the time, although I also like to travel. And I care about this city, and I think it's the best place in America to live because I love big, cosmopolitan, international cities with lots of foreigners. I don't like Americans that much, so I like to live in a city full of foreigners, which is New York. Anyway, I would love to have been here on September 11th. Unfortunately, I was not here. I was in Berlin, and I was in my hotel room writing at 3 in the afternoon, and a friend called me from New York, and because it was 9 o'clock in the morning of that day in New York, it was 3 in the afternoon in Europe, and told me what had happened. Seeing these terrible images, thinking of what was really happening, and hearing all these public figures and journalism talking nonsense about how this was an attack on civilization itself. This was Pearl Harbor. This was the beginning of the Third World War. We must all stand behind President Bush. This was an attack on virtue, freedom, civilization. The world will stand behind Bush. As I realized right from the beginning, just watching television, that we were now headed for a period of compulsory conformity, of compulsory consensus, in which people would be very afraid or intimidated about expressing any kind of disagreement about how to react to the terrorist attack. Now, I am not a pacifist, and I am absolutely for a strong response to the attack of September 11th. Whatever the bad reputation of America in different parts of the world, this does not in any way not only justify what happened on September 11th, it shouldn't inhibit, I think, the United States from going after the network, and it is a real network, Al-Qaeda, which sponsored this attack. Nevertheless, what I worried about at the beginning, and what I worry about even more, because my worst fears, in a sense, have been borne out, that this attack would be used as a justification for changes in this country.
President Bush called this a war against terrorism, but terrorism has no flag, no territory, no head of state. Can this war ever end?
That's the problem. That is precisely the problem. You have, first of all, the declaration of war. Well, it's not a declared war, you just call it a war. It's a rhetorical statement, but once you call something a war, then all sorts of abrogations of civil liberties become valid, and the call for consensus becomes very strong. You know, the bill, I return to the question of civil liberties, the bill which was passed by the Congress that abridges many of civil liberties in the name of fighting terrorism, was called the Patriot Bill. And to me, this is straight out of 1984. If they want to call it the anti-terrorist bill, okay, at least they're calling it what it's about. But if they call it the Patriot Bill, that is Orwellian language. Then they are saying to the people in the House of Representatives and the Senate, you're going to vote against the Patriot Bill? In other words, you're going to not be a patriot? So the mood now is much less tolerant of, I don't call it dissent, I call it just debate.
Do you see a possibility of fighting terrorism through economic and social development of the 3 billion human beings who live in poverty around the globe?
Well, of course, there's always a possibility to do anything that the 2,000 people who really run the world want to do, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it that way. The present economic system is one that brings great prosperity to a small number of people and increasing poverty to the majority. Of course I see a possibility, but I don't see a possibility in the present economic and political system. Present feeling is that national security comes first and civil liberties are sacrificed. The question is, it's an unlimited license. There's no normal way to challenge this procedure.
Susan, your opinions have provoked furious reactions from the right wing. How do you react to this?
Well, I try to say, it's hard, however, I try to say to myself, I have the right enemies. And that if I am making some kind of contribution, I'm bound to have enemies. That's what I try to say. In fact, of course, it's quite frightening. And I may seem brave, and I may even do things which objectively are brave, but it doesn't mean I'm not afraid. I just make myself do them anyway.
I have read reviews on your latest book, Where the Stress Falls, and they are really attacks on your public opinions. What does it tell you about the honesty of literary criticism?
Well, I think that there aren't very many good literary critics or literary reviewers. We're in a very hysterical time. We're in a very crazy time in which, for some reason, it actually surprises me. I have become a kind of a lightning rod, a figure. I'm receiving a great deal of support privately, and all kinds of messages and letters and faxes and emails and phone calls and so on. And people come up to me on the street every day. Every time I go out, I go to the movies, people are coming up and say, keep up the good work, and so on and so on. But I am very, to my great surprise, very controversial, and this crazy mood of the country right now has immensely distorted the reaction to this book of essays, which I've just published, which will be translated and appear in Spanish. And this is a collection of essays on opera, there's one on gardens, there's a number on literary figures, Russian poets like Tsvetaeva, Marina Tsvetaeva and Joseph Brodsky. There are a couple of pieces on film and photography. There's some pieces on writing. I mean, there's hardly any political. Toward the end, I talk about Sarajevo and the responsibilities of the writer, but most of the essays are about different kinds of arts and cultural matters. And what's happening is the book is not being reviewed. It's just being an occasion to attack. Well, there have, of course, been some support, too. There was a very good review in the Los Angeles Times. There was a personal attack in the New York Times, that kind of thing. It surprises me. And I don't worry about the future of the book. I know the book will last long after the attacks have been forgotten. But once again, I don't so much take it personally. I just take it as a bad sign for the climate of opinion here. I think it's not a good sign.
Susan Sontag, what are the values that an independent writer such as yourself defend in this situation?
Well, I think that there are certain values in this country that I care very much about and I want to preserve, which is the respect and tolerance for diversity and the powerful tradition of civil liberties and protection of individual opinion and right to disagreement, and a very strong legal system which protects the rights of individuals. I'm very interested in protecting those values and that tradition. I also think that writers should be, in my view, although it's not always true, internationally minded. To me, being a writer is being part of an international society or republic, what used to be called in the old days the Republic of Letters. I could feel closer to, let's say, a Mexican writer or an Italian writer or a Russian writer or a Japanese writer than to any American writer. I have a very old-fashioned idea of what a writer can do. A writer is a very privileged person. Without being elected, a writer is self-elected, very odd position. You decide to be a writer. No one tells you to be a writer. You don't have to pass an examination or get a certificate from the government, at least not in our society. And then you do have, if your work meets with approval and you become well known, a kind of platform to speak from. That's a great privilege and it's a great responsibility. Now, of course, most writers are going to be conformist, just like most people. You can't identify the writer with the gadfly, with the critic, with the dissident, with the voice of conscience. Most writers are going to be quite ordinary human beings and simply want to get along and want to not bother or get into any kind of controversial situation. But there are a few writers who want to use the platform of being a writer as a place to make some kind of contribution as a citizen of their own countries or as a citizen of the International Republic of Letters or as a citizen of the world. After all, in the end, we're all just human beings, separated by geography and other things. So I think this is a noble undertaking. I also think it's an incredible waste of time sometimes because, it's, in the end, one says, oh, politics is the enemy of the writer, and isn't it best just to stay home and stay at your desk, and can you really do any good? And yet, I don't know, the call of conscience. Some people are more selfish. Lots of people are very conformist. It's really a question of temperament. But the most important thing is you elect yourself to do that. Now, you very politely said North American, but there is a difference between, let's say, writers from the United States and writers from Mexico. I think in Mexico, there is more of a tradition of the writer as public figure and voice of conscience. And that's quite interesting to me. I think that tradition is weaker here, the tradition of writers speaking out on public issues, matters of conscience.
Susan Sontag, thank you very much. Con Susan Sontag en Nueva York, Silvia Lemus.